let's just put this in context. Maxwell did own the Daily Mirror, and he also ran Pergamon Press, which was a huge journal publishing concern, and its roots were straight after the Second World War in Germany. At the end of the war, it was quite a desirable area to get their hands on all the scientific publishing, all the scientific journals that had been published during the war. He had himself depicted as Samson at the gates of Gaza.
Right. Do you want to say a few things?
It's been a couple of years, like you say, but I haven't been asleep. I've been researching, and I'd like to kind of pull it all together now. And what kind of inspired me to come back at this time was because Epstein was in the news, and of course his partner in crime, allegedly, Ghislaine Maxwell, her father, Robert Maxwell, was somebody I already had in my database. So I went to look, and I found some quite extraordinary things that led me into researching him much more deeply. And I've taken a sort of selection of some of the documents that I've come across, and hopefully that'll help to illustrate, what I'm about to talk about.
So give them 2 minutes of what you've done and what you are.
Yes, I did some research because as a twin who'd been part of a national survey, I was able to look into that. I remembered that Maxwell had funded the child research surveys, the one that I belonged to, Robert Maxwell. Now that rang alarm bells, because Epstein was setting up honey traps with vulnerable children who he identified as being potential targets through their vulnerability and their social circumstances, and he was using them to potentially blackmail politicians, etc., and scientists, to have them in some way compromised. Now, this is incredibly parallel to what Maxwell was doing. He too was courting scientists and head politicians and wielding influence in a very similar way. So his links to this survey, was something I had to look into, because it would not be appropriate for such a person to get their hands on the details of the survey, as they're so intimate.
This is a slide with Robert Maxwell, 2 boxes with some text highlighted there.
Okay, so what we have here is the person who was head of the institute that ran this child development surveys, that gathered the data, a huge amount of data on the children, and he
just for people who can't actually read that, because or maybe they're looking at the low resolution, the central box is the International Center for Child Studies, and that's had Robert Maxwell as actually the main funder. Okay, that's this middle box.
This chap became director, and he's being interviewed as a kind of witness testimony, which is what people do, then their reminiscence. So he is actually saying that Maxwell was the main funder, as you say, of one of the particular surveys. But he also says that the collecting of the data took over a person. I'm reading from the bottom box now. The second line, could really take over a person's life for a day or two to collect this data because this is the scale of the depth that they went into. He also went on to say that it was they relied heavily on teachers to collect the data as well. And I have to say that was done secretly. We weren't made aware that that was happening. And he also says that head teachers and health visitors collected the data in the field. He recruited them at a very low price, and he didn't use professional survey people. So that does give us some insight into how relaxed the rules could be at that time. Okay. Do you want to put on the next picture then, Miles, please? I'll just say the chap in the last one, he was called John Binner. Did I mention his name?
I don't think so. Now we got a picture of Robert Maxwell, acclaimed by Margaret Thatcher as one of us.
Maxwell was a great supporter of Margaret Thatcher, and he's actually quoted as saying he wouldn't be where he was today if it wasn't for Margaret Thatcher.
Now, I think the context of that, to people who don't understand the politics of that, Robert Maxwell ran the Daily Mirror, owned the Daily Mirror, one of the big Labour supporting, the Common Man newspaper. So you have somebody who is a newspaper billionaire or millionaire proprietor. So you're talking about somebody the same level as Murdoch. But he ran this British newspaper, the Daily Mirror, and he was supporting Labour. And here we have this thing about Mrs. Thatcher, who's obviously extremely right-wing conservative.
Yes. So another link with Thatcher is that both Thatcher and Maxwell were funding the child development surveys. They were funding the institute where they were administered from, and they attended fundraising. And on this picture, he's quoted as Margaret Thatcher is quoted as describing Robert Maxwell as one of us, and there he's arguing with minors, as you say. He was even a Labour MP himself, actually, Member of Parliament. My interpretation of one of us is a eugenicist who's willing to see themselves as more superior than the rest of the herd. If we move on now to the next picture.
Okay, that's a table with various sweep 1, sweep 2.
Okay, so this is just more documentation to show that Pergamon Press and subsequently after that the Daily Mirror funded the 1970 cohort as a major sponsor until 1991 when Maxwell popped his socks. So moving on there, another document which names the Daily Mirror group should be named, and Pergamon Press are named as major sources of funding. Appendix 1. Do we have that one?
Yeah, but there was a bit of a problem there, Kathy. We're showing it, Appendix 1. He didn't pop his clogs. He was thrown off the back of his boat in the Atlantic, and all the members of his yacht, all the crew, were Mossad agents. They all disappeared instantly.
I heard that.
And he looked for money. He was looking for money, and I think that's when he decided to chuck him off over the side. Pension funds raided, things like that. Do you want to talk about that context of his ending, and then where did he end up being buried?
Oh, I know about his Israel links. He was a major Zionist. He was buried with all honors in Israel, and his funeral was attended by the Israeli Prime Minister and high-ranking officials. Additionally to that, when he moved into his property, which was situated in Oxford, called Headington Hall, there was a mirror, there was a window, a stained glass window, which depicted Samson at the gates of Gaza. But however, he undertook to renovate the building, which he rented of the council, and he had himself depicted as Samson at the gates of Gaza for the stained glass window. Now, if we move on from the appendix onto the next slide, the London Review of Books.
Okay, we got that up now.
We see here, now I shall just read out this snippet from halfway down. This is the ALSPAC study. This is the Avon study, longitudinal study. It went into such details that at the birth of the babies, they gathered the placentas. So it says here, when Jean Golding, having been refused funding for a 1982 cohort, began planning, Barker urged her to get the placentas. Yeah, so, but these particular surveys, the depth they went into, I mean, they were psychologically profiled, socially profiled, the day-to-day routines, the likes and dislikes. Now, in terms of Maxwell's involvement in all this, I did go looking a lot deeper into what he was about. He's been called an Israeli Mossad agent, he's been called a Russian agent, he's been called a British agent, which because he was. The only party that he didn't undermine through selling promised software with the back door was Britain. What is really interesting is that when Butterworth Springer was starting, now Butterworth Springer, let's just put this in context. Maxwell did own the Daily Mirror, and he also ran Pergamon Press, which was a huge journal publishing concern, and its roots were straight after the Second World War in Germany. Butterworth Springer was initiated, so at the end of the war it was quite a desirable area to get their hands on all the scientific publishing, all the scientific journals that had been published during the war. So Maxwell was placed right at the heart of this and liaised with a chap called Paul Rosabod, who was a spy whose codename was the Griffin. So he was an intelligence agent for the British. He was a scientist and he studied nuclear energy. And as you know, everyone wanted to know what Germany was up to in the nuclear bomb department. Butterworth Springer was initiated in 1945 by a memo from the Cabinet Office in Britain. It was not started by Maxwell in any way. It was a huge concern. Present at the meeting that set up Butterworth Springer was representatives from the Cabinet Office, the Board of Trade, the CIA, MI6.
Those are a list of compromised agencies by the DVD, according to some sources.
Okay, right. Well, also the Vatican was represented. Also, there was a scientific advisory board set up in order to initiate Butterworth Springer, and it was attended by all the top leading scientists and nuclear scientists who went on into the Manhattan Project and CERN, which were then called the tube alloys. If we click on to the next slide here, this is actually about it. The emissary, yeah. The emissary from the board to Butterworth. So that's the Board of Trade, was Count Vanden Heuvel, a shadowy MI6 officer who had been chief of station in Bern during the war. Dutch by birth, the epitome of a diplomat with his imperial whiskers and black Homburg, and known to many as Fanny the Fixer, his prime post-war role was in the recruitment of Z agents, journalists, publishers, and businessmen. One was Butterworth's joint managing director, Major John Whitlock, a former SOE officer and intelligence veteran with a reputation as a Freemason and a likable rogue. He'd been at the board meeting with fellow director and SOE officer Hugh Quennell, who enjoyed some prestige at Butterworth. So this is the team that went on to set up Butterworth Springer. Includes this level of intelligence agents, as well as I say, oh yes, if we go on to the next slide, there's a bit more information about Vanden Heuvel, who it says was a count of the Holy Roman Empire. We have linked here to the setting up. We have, as you see, Alexander Fleming, Charles Galton Darwin, who was a scientist. We've got the highest caliber of people. Charles Hambro, the banker, representing the Vatican. Vanden Heuvel, E.V. Appleton from the Appleton Rutherford Laboratories, Hugh Quennell, the MI6 guy, John Anderson and Tube Alloys, and MI6. You know, this is who set up Butterworth Springer. which quietly transhumed into Pergamon Press with Maxwell at the helm. Now here, on the setting up of this, Maxwell was placed as managing director. So I maintain that from the get-go, it was meant to be, it wasn't widely advertised that Maxwell was operating for the government, for MI6 in such a blatant
But
capacity.
those names, Kathy, that's a lot of big names. They're all agents. For who?
Well,
Or for what?
if you mention which ones, I have the information.
Well, do you want to start at the top and work down?
Well, Alexander Fleming, okay, the discoverer of penicillin, and then you have Charles Galton Darwin.
Any relation to the other Darwin?
Yeah, he was his grandson. What's he called? Darwin. Yeah, Charles, the original Charles Darwin. He was, one of those. He was a member of the Tube Alloys program, so he was a physicist. He worked for the National Physical Laboratory. He was a eugenicist. Charles Hambro, he's a member of the Pinay Circle, the Circle, which is a fairly secret organization of very powerful European wheelers and dealers. He was a member of the SOE. He was involved with
What's the SOE, if you can describe that, those initials?
The Special Overseas Executive, which was a joint American and British division in the Second World War. So these are all of many of the people represented were involved with the SOE here. To pick out, now we have the scientist John Anderson, another Tube Alloys. He was on the scientific advisory board.
What's the significance of the Tube Alloys?
Well, the Tube Alloys was the British Manhattan Project before the Manhattan Project, because they did join up with the Manhattan Project. So it was the British nuclear program during the war.
Which, of course, are these tubes which have got the radiation and stuff in them.
Well, it was a bit of a decoy. The name was to put people off from knowing, because it was very secret.
Well, if you see all these pipes going in and out of a place, they're just tube alloys, aren't they?
Yeah, and also Butterworth sold its interest to Maxwell for 13,000. So it was a very small amount for such a huge enterprise.
Is it significance in the number?
Well, you think it would be,
About 13?
They had the whole team of top scientists in the country setting up the advisory committee. So to get it was a bargain basement price, wasn't it? 13,000. It seems to be quite low. Anyway, I'm just saying how easily and under the radarly he slipped in. Butterworth Springer slipped into being Pergamon.
Exactly.
And also the choice of the word Pergamon is by no means insignificant. The Pergamon altar is also known as the seat of Satan, and it's a huge, incredibly stunning carved altar, the Pergamon altar. And another interesting fact is that Pergamon uses the coin from Pergamon, from the place Pergamon, and that has there's myths around, or accounts around that, representing the spoils of war. So it's almost like it was very deliberately chosen because, of course, it represented the bringing of as much academic research into the hands of the Brits, and, if you like, through Butterworth Springer, it was founded in Berlin right after the war.
Do you want to go back to the slide order then?
This is really just showing how Pergamon published all the Club of Rome documents, what you call them, journals.
Goals for Mankind, all those sort of books.
Those are all from the Club of Rome. So we're getting into like what Pergamon published was interesting. So the first thing I looked at was all the MK Ultra doctors I knew, and to see if any of them were linked with the name Pergamon, and they all were. And the reason they were all there was because Pergamon had a symposium division that printed many of the well-known names. I looked up Dr. Joel Ells, I looked up Delgado, I looked up, a few, and they're all there. So I'm thinking, why, the links with MK Ultra, and then it dawned on me, if Maxwell was in a position to court scientists and put them at the heads of their field, many of these fields were newly invented, that he was able to transform the face of academia, in actual fact. Now, one person that Maxwell was working closely with was the very one doctor who, in the UK, who was identified as working under MK Ultra sub-project 111, was Dr. Hans Eysenck. Right. Now, the reason I've highlighted this is because this is one example of many where academics are bemoaning the fate of what happened to journals after Pergamon Press got their hands on them. So this chap is saying communication was the focus of the first journals in 1665. This remained so until after the Second World War, when a major expansion in scientific research activity and funding was matched by a proliferation of new journals. Until then, journals had largely been the preserve of learned societies, but commercial publishers now saw an opportunity for profit. Pergamon Press, spearheaded by Robert Maxwell, was a leader who cultivated prospective authors through lavish hospitality at conferences. This helped encourage a mindset amongst researchers that the journal in which one published could be an important consideration. Some journals promoted exclusivity, rejecting many submissions and conferring prestige on the authors they accepted. So, as the case I'm making is that Pergamon actually deliberately engineered a change in academia under the guidance of.
And if you don't get peer reviewed by those journals, you don't have any science. So they basically got a stranglehold on science.
Okay, so actually, if we move on to the next slide, this is the witness seminar from the academics that wrote for the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry. And they say the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry began its first issue in 1960, as it took some time in finding a publisher. The egregious Robert Maxwell agreed to do so and really was an enormous help. He had a wide distribution network and he was very interested. He gave wild parties at Headington Hall to which the editors were invited. So we all had a jolly good time when he was around before he fell off his boat. So do you see how it's like Epstein in a sense, that he was courting, and he was also appointing who would be head of these areas, head of the journals. And if the journals were successful, then these people would become very major in their fields. Moving on, I think we're going to get to.
It is difficult, perhaps even inappropriate, that one.
Yes, to assess the direct impact that the research report, the changing images of man, may have had on society. One reason is that the study was not published promptly, hence it did not enter the standard bibliographic reference systems that can be used for such assessments. But interestingly, until Irving Laszlo and the Pergamon Press initiated their Explorations of World Order series, note the name, Exploration of World Order series, the study was judged unsuitable for commercial publication. So they were involved with this changing images of man symposium, publishing the sort of eugenic and transhumanistic agenda that was discussed in those conferences. Again, as I say, linked to MK Ultra. Some of the attendees also attended the Macy conferences. Yeah, and so if you click onto the next slide. So this is written by Hans Eysenck, who, as I said, was noted in, I think it was either the Spectator or the New Statesman, as having worked under sub-project 111 of MK Ultra in 1963. And in John Mark's book, the Manchurian Candidate, which is all about MK Ultra, he mentions that Hans Eysenck was published by the Human Ecological Fund, which was a funding front for MK Ultra, 9 times. 9 papers were published in 1963, and in 1963 he also worked closely with Robert Maxwell, as he did in 1962 as well. So Eysenck was doing studies into hypnosis for MK Ultra. So Hans Eysenck had 9 papers published in 1963 by an MK Ultra funding front, and he also worked on a hypnosis project, Subproject 111 for MK Ultra, secretly funded by the CIA, and he was also working closely with Robert Maxwell the same year, and also the year before, and also previous to 1962. Because he says here in his book that he's written, called Rebel with a Cause, about 1962 I entered into another contract with Robert Maxwell dealing with a project that was dear to my heart. I undertook to assume the editorship of an international series of monographs in experimental psychology. So here we have that Maxwell has placed Hans Eysenck at the head of this international series of monographs. He's placed Eysenck at the head of the Journal for Behavioral Research and Therapy. Maxwell's influence in placing, in this case, somebody linked to MK Ultra at that very time. So if we go on to the next slide.
And that's, do you think this is important, Gray, dutifully translated?
Yes, this is the book from the book Playing with Fire, The Controversial Career of Hans J. Eysenck by Roderick D. Buchanan. And he says, Eysenck sent Gray, so he's talking about another Pavlovian research behaviorist, and he sent him to a maverick publisher with a track record in bringing Russian science to the West. This was Robert Maxwell, the colourful publishing magnate named Captain Bob by the English tabloids, helping Eysenck found the key journal, Behaviour Research and Therapy. So this is just, illustrating what I'm saying, basically. So if we can go on to the next slide, we have a picture of the man there, Hans Eysenck, an interesting picture.
With a lot of computers and other forms of tape data recording?
Yes, absolutely. And he has actually been discredited also, some of his research. I won't say any more about that now, I've not looked into it, but the fact is, this was the chap, he designed a lot of behavioural questionnaires for assessing personality. Like in America, MK Ultra was linked very much with Timothy Leary, who designed personality questionnaires to find out more about people's personality, and Hans Eysenck was another master of personality questionnaires, but he was working in the UK. He was huge in twins research. He's very well known for researching twins.
And what was the basic bottom line? Why were they doing that with twins? What was actually the reason why they were doing that research with twins?
Well, they like to research twins because they can, if a twin is not genetically matched, if it's a fraternal twin, then they can more precisely identify the effects of nurture. And if a twin is genetically identical, the identical twins, then it's going to be the effects of nature as opposed to nurture, and they can play about with those parameters. And they were very interested, especially in twins that had been separated at birth, plotting their progress. They can use one twin as a control and see how different tweaks, in the environment might affect another twin. There's all sorts of possibilities.
And just while we're here, just once again give a shout out where people can see your work and your blogs, the old stuff and the new stuff.
Yeah, that's Cathki, CATHKI, Cathki.wordpress.com. That's my blog. So yeah, I think we've kind of covered.
I mean, it's also good because, I mean, we're dealing with you in the southwest of the southwest of Ireland, an alien country. I mean, there's a lot of stuff lying around out there. Star Wars was filmed there. This has been a really good night. I think I'm just going to keep the whole lot in. Any parting comments?
Thank you so much for inviting me to share my research. And
It's an honor.
I don't know, I'm kind of tired now, so...
Yeah, we've been running. It's coming up to midnight, I think, here now. Or 11 o'clock. What time is it? Oh, yeah, yeah.
I've only just got started now with this research, you know. I feel like my interest is sparked, but I'm in a really good place here. I think I took 2 years out and I really took control of my life, you know. And I'm feeling great.
Well, you look great, Kathy. You're on form. Good. And I think we can just about hear the sea in the background there.
I can hear the sea.
Yeah.
I can hear it.
Okay, well, thank you, Kathy Morgan. It's been absolutely great. A lot of work there, a lot of really deep, very important information there that you've given us, and very important, really detailed of the scale of into the detail of what that means within our society right across, and a lot of people there, a lot of stuff, a lot to digest. Thank you, Kathy Morgan. Bye for now.
Bye, Miles. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll come out and record.
Okay.